Morning. So nice to be here on this lovely summer's day. I have a request. Whoever, I don't know who's in charge of this, maybe Jim, I don't know, but when I'm introduced, that picture of me comes up, could you make that a little smaller? It kind of scares me when I'm sitting there. Just big. I'm surprised some people don't just run out the door. But thank you for not doing that today. So today's theme is the divine order, Dharma. In the Hindu tradition, we refer to the divine order as the Dharma. I'm sure you've heard that word before. And actually, you will find the word Dharma, it has multiple definitions depending on the context. But when we're talking about what was expressed in the daily word, we would say, yeah, that's the Dharma, the divine order, how things are in the universe. We all have our personal Dharma and we have our collective Dharma. I'd like to start by mentioning something that happened to me several years ago. It was back in the 90s, and there was a play that was going to be staged here in Grand Rapids. And if you don't know this about me, I've been very active in the theater community for a number of years. Not as much anymore, but I still occasionally get on the boards. And the play that was going to be staged through Actors Theater was called Jeffrey. And at the time, Jeffrey was a big deal. They ended up making it into a movie. It wasn't quite as successful as it was as an off-Broadway play. But the reason Jeffrey was a big deal is because it became sort of a gay anthem. It was written and originally staged right when the AIDS crisis was hitting its peak. And even though the terms AIDS or HIV never appear in the play, we know what's going on. Because Jeffrey is a New York City resident. He is seeing his friends get sick and die. But at the same time, it's not a tragedy. There are many, many comedic moments in it. So I went out for audition, and it was interesting because just about every gay actor in the city was up there hoping for a part. And not only was every gay actor out there, but every gay man who thought he could act was out there. And then there was me. And quite honestly, when I got cast, I did feel a little bad because to a lot of these men who showed up, this was not just a part in a play. This was an opportunity to be a part of a movement. And even though I was an ally of the movement, it didn't affect me personally the way it did these gentlemen. But nonetheless, I got the part, I accepted it, and it was a wonderful, wonderful experience. There were 6 or 7 men in the cast. I was the only straight man, and there was one woman in the cast who happened to be straight. But anyway, I enjoyed it very much. And one thing that was really interesting is that one time I was about ready to go to rehearsal. I was leaving the house, and so I was saying goodbye to my wife, and she said, I've noticed something about this rehearsal process that I've never noticed in any other play that you've been in. I said, what's that? She said, when you go to rehearsal, you're dressing a lot better. What can I say? The boys set the bar high. You get a play with a bunch of straight men, we'd show up looking like slobs, but not here. Anyway, that's beside the point. Why did I bring that up? What was important is this. I played multiple parts. Everybody played multiple parts except for Jeffrey. Jeffrey was always Jeffrey, but those of us who were supporting characters played multiple parts. I can't remember how many I played, but it might have been like 10. One of my favorite parts was that of a Catholic priest. Jeffrey is experiencing this moral challenge, this theological and existential challenge. He sees all of his friends, or many of his friends, getting sick and dying, and he wants to know what kind of God would do this. And I explained to him that his challenge goes back to his childhood, because he probably grew up in a home that had an original cast recording of My Fair Lady from the original Broadway cast. Can we? This is the album cover that Jeffrey grew up with, and I realize now I'm speaking to people of a certain age, but I remember this. My parents did not have this, but my aunt and uncle did. Look at this album cover really, really closely, and you'll see, for instance, the main characters. You have Eliza Doolittle down there, the woman, and then Professor Higgins. If you remember the story, Professor Higgins turns Eliza Doolittle from a Cockney common woman to a delightful lady of grace and elegance, right? And so you can see that on the cover here, they look like marionettes. Then you have another person. Now, this is a real person. This is not a character in the play, but that's somebody, he's dead now, but he's a real live human being. Anybody remember who that might be? That, ladies and gentlemen, is George Bernard Shaw, the great Irish playwright. Because George Bernard Shaw wrote Pygmalion, and Pygmalion was turned into the musical My Fair Lady. So those of us who recognize George Bernard Shaw certainly understand, okay, Eliza Doolittle and Professor Higgins were characters, and he manipulated them as an author to a play would. But look what he looks like. First of all, he is somewhat elderly. He has a beard. He's in the clouds. He has wings. Who does he look like? Right? Other than the fact that he's bald. Because, male pattern baldness is inherited. And that poses all sorts of theological questions, if in fact that is supposed to be God. But it certainly is a God-like character. And what my character, the priest, is telling Jeffrey is, you see this album cover and you think that that's how God is. You think that God is just pulling our strings. You think that God is the grand chess master in the sky, and that we virtually have no free will, and that this world just has a particular order to it that God is entirely manipulating. And thus, when we see horrible things around us, death and dying, when we see pain inflicted on people, we ask the question, why would God do that? As if God is doing it in the first place, or God allowing it in the first place. So we need to completely reform our understanding of what is happening here. What is the divine order? Is this the divine order that we're mere puppets? Those of you who, if there's anybody here who came out of the Calvinist tradition, you know that there is no real free will, that salvation comes to those whom God chooses, and that there is no opportunity for someone to change their destiny, that God knew before the beginning of the world who's saved and who isn't. So let's find out a little bit about what the Hindu Dharma says about this. What do the Hindu scriptures say, and how do I think that they resonate with unity theology and philosophy? Okay. According to the Vedas, which are our foundational scriptures, we have this understanding that of macrocosmic will of God, microcosmic will of humanity. That is to say, that each and every one of us has free will. God does not manipulate our lives. God is invested in our lives because we are all expressions of God. But there is nobody in the clouds moving the chess pieces of our lives, making us go here or there or staying somewhere else. That just isn't a part of it. We as expressions of God have free will in this lifetime. And we can choose to go in a spiritual direction or in a direction that is completely antithetical to the spiritual life. We are creating that ourselves. We are creating the world. We are the ones who create war. We are the ones who create peace. Now, that's microcosmically. Macrocosmically, in the big picture, that is when we have this divine order that must go in a certain direction. And that direction is that since we are all expressions of God, since this physical universe is an expression of God and nothing less than that, not a separate creation, but an actual expression of divinity itself, we and it have no choice other than to return to our divine origins. Now, in Hinduism, that means it may take multiple lives to do it. But at some point, we all wake up. We all realize that there is something more than this physical world. We realize that our happiness is dependent on the happiness of others. Now, unfortunately, not all of us realize this at the same time, so we have to deal with people and events that are inspired by the more materialistic, right? This is why we have to deal with war. This is why we have to deal with corruption in politics. This is why we have to deal with people playing their music too loud in our neighborhood on a Friday night. I mean, it's because, again, we evolve at different paces, but we all do evolve. And the more we evolve, the more we understand that there is a divine order, there is a Dharma to the world, and we accept it for the present. This is the key. We have to come to an understanding that we accept the way the world is for the moment, knowing full well that it is the way it is at this moment because of the consciousness of humanity and the actions of humanity. If the world was a different place, right, if, let's say, it was all of a sudden peaceful, well, it wouldn't be because of the divine order. It would be out of kilt, because we are not there at this time in our evolution. We just aren't. So we have to accept the divine order, that the world is the way it is, but that doesn't mean that we cannot work to change it. As a matter of fact, to look at the divine order and throw up our hands and say, well, this is the way the world is, and I'm just going to live with it, that goes against our personal Dharma. That we are refusing to stand up and say, I will not accept the worldwide hunger or local hunger. I will not accept people living in pain and deprivation. I will not accept religions that manipulate, control, and do violence. So we are charged with moving the divine order along, accepting it for the moment, but not accepting it in the long run, knowing that we all have a responsibility to make change, to make positive change. And of course, here's another little trick we also have to do. We have to realize that our efforts are more important than the results. We make the effort to change. So we are in the we're in the work department. God is in the results department. I read a long time ago a magazine article. It was really wonderful. I wish I had a copy of it. And the author made a very important point. What he did is he wrote about many social activists of the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And these were people who had no spirituality. They were very good people. They saw homelessness, they saw corruption, they saw inequality, and they did their best to work towards alleviating the pain of other people. But they had no spirituality. And so they were looking for results. And what happened to many of them? They burned out. Some of them committed suicide. They really did throw up their hands after working in the social justice movements for 10, 20, 30 years and not seeing the change that they envisioned way back when. They said, what's the use? Well, so again, some just burned out and moved in a different direction, and others actually took their own lives because they could not stand to see this pain. And the author of this article then contrasted that with people who work for the same social justice projects, but they had a spirituality about them. They were able to look at their efforts and not at the results, because the results can be so bloody incremental. And we have to live with that because it isn't our karma, meaning that the actions, and more importantly, the consciousness that inspires those actions, has not completely turned around. So I encourage you, as I encourage myself every day, to look towards what can be. But don't look for the results to happen in front of us. Be like Moses, who inspired Martin Luther King to say, I have been to the mountain. I can see what is possible. I may not be able to get there with you, but I see in the future a better place for us. We're able to accept what is, and we commit ourselves to changing that to what could and should be. Let us affirm, Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, that we acknowledge the Dharma, that which is, that which we created, and yet we also acknowledge our divine origins, our complete faith that we will join you in ever-existing, ever-conscious, ever-new bliss. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Peace, peace, peace. Thank you. Namaste.